What you're about to hear is a first-person confession inspired by the real experiments of Robert Cornish. Just one voice from inside the lab, telling what should never be known. They said it was madness, that death was absolute, irreversible. But Robert Cornish didn't believe that. In the 1930s, he brought dogs back to life, or so the reports claimed. Crude machines, oxygen tanks, a compound he named liquivivac. They ridiculed him, buried his research, erased his name. But I found it. I found everything. He failed, yes, but he was close, closer than they ever allowed him to be. With the right refinements, modern knowledge, improved technique, I believed I could succeed where he fell short. This wasn't about science anymore, not entirely. It was about proving a point, about reclaiming something lost. And I did it. I brought him back. But he never called me by my name, not once. He opened his eyes, but what looked out through them wasn't him. I wasn't always obsessed with reanimation, at least not openly. My field was regenerative medicine, neural repair, tissue reconstruction, post-trauma response. But death was always the wall we couldn't climb. You can regrow tissue, you can replace bone, you can even keep a heart beating outside the body for hours. But once the mind goes silent, everything else becomes irrelevant. The machine shuts down, the lights go out. That truth always bothered me, not because it was painful, but because it felt incomplete, too final, too convenient. I first read about Robert Cornish in an old journal buried in the back of the university's archive. The article was brief, dismissive even. It described his attempts in the 1930s to revive dead dogs using a combination of mechanical stimulation and a formula he called liquivivac. He claimed some success, brief pulses of life, movement, breath. But his work was cast aside as quack science, and he faded into obscurity. But the deeper I looked, the more I found. Unpublished notes, handwritten correspondences, a grainy film reel, lost and unlabeled, showing a dog twitching violently on a metal table while wires pumped rhythm into its chest. Its eyes opened for just a moment before the reel cut to static. That one frame stayed with me. Those eyes. At first it was academic curiosity, then a puzzle, then something closer to obsession. I began mapping his notes against modern practices, defibrillation methods, synthetic blood substitutes, neurotransmitter reactivation. It all clicked into place in a way that was almost poetic. Crude, yes. But Cornish wasn't a lunatic. He was early, too early. Then Ethan died. He was my assistant, my friend, young, sharp, full of ideas. We'd worked side by side for 3 years, an accident, a seizure in the lab. By the time I reached him, he was gone, brain dead within minutes. They said it was peaceful. I watched his body on the slab and thought, no, not yet. That's when the project truly began. I revisited Cornish's formula and modified it, integrating a compound I'd been developing for synaptic conductivity. I recalibrated the fluid ratios, added heat regulation vectors, and prepared a new cocktail. I called it Revivum. Cornish had failed, yes, but he didn't have what I had. The technology, the precision, the time, and now I had the motivation. The idea began to evolve from theory to intention. I wasn't trying to honor Cornish's work. I was going to surpass it, prove that it could be done, that death wasn't the wall we thought it was, just a locked door. And I had finally found the key. The lab was never meant for this. Originally, it was a storage facility beneath the biology wing. Concrete floors, poor lighting, copper piping that groaned in the walls like something alive. But it was isolated, forgotten, perfect. I brought in what I needed slowly, piece by piece. Refrigeration units for chemical storage, a collapsible surgical table reinforced with steel, vials, tubing, syringes, bio-waste containers, industrial freezers modified to maintain a specific molecular equilibrium. None of it came through official university channels. Most of it I built myself or ordered under fake requisitions. I had to be careful, too careful, but that only deepened the thrill. Cornish's original formula had been rudimentary, a mix of adrenaline, anticoagulants, and a proprietary compound he never fully documented. I suspected it was some form of early synaptic stimulant. His mistake, I believed, was overloading the nervous system too fast. The body came back, briefly, but the brain couldn't handle the surge. I spent months re-engineering the compound. I introduced a blend of neuromodulators and a polymer-based delivery agent that could circulate through tissue gradually, not explosively. Revivum was less a serum and more a system, a way to reignite electrical impulse slowly, sustainably. My journal entries became frantic. Scribbled formulas, chemical chains, sketches of circulatory flow. I barely ate, slept in shifts. Time no longer mattered. There were setbacks, of course. Rats survived reanimation, but became catatonic. One revived, only to tear at its own limbs within minutes. Another stopped breathing again after 48 seconds, but its heart kept beating. That one stayed with me, the rhythm of its chest, stubbornly alive without awareness. Then the opportunity came. Ethan's body was still in the university's medical storage, unclaimed. His family had refused to take him, too shaken by the suddenness of it all. I didn't need a cadaver. I needed him. There was a part of me that still hesitated, that looked at his face under that thin white sheet and felt something clawing up from my gut. This was a friend, a person, a man I had laughed with, argued with, built ideas alongside, not a subject, not a vessel. But that part of me was dying. He had been gone for less than 48 hours, cold preserved, no decomposition, no trauma. If it was ever going to work, it had to be now. I told myself it was for him, that he would understand, that I was giving him a chance no one else could. The lie helped, a little. I laid out the surgical kit with clinical precision: scalpel, bone saw, chest spreader, ventilation system, external defibrillator, oxygen tank, blood substitute, chilled and filtered. Revivum in 3 glass vials, each capped and labeled. The body was cleaned, shaved and positioned. Tubes inserted, clamps secured, heart monitors aligned. I recorded everything, not for science, for control, for memory. I set the revival date, March 3rd, midnight. I wanted silence. Total isolation, no one watching, no interference. The body of Ethan C. was ready, and so was I. This was no longer about Cornish. This was no longer about legacy or science or even grief. This was about power, and I was finally ready to wield it. March 3rd, midnight. The lab was cold, too cold. I adjusted the overhead lamp, its flickering fluorescent light casting long, twitching shadows over Ethan's body. The steel table beneath him was sanitized, bolted, silent. The 3 vials of Revivum stood ready, a deep amber fluid, dense, almost syrup-like, each one drawn into a syringe, chilled to precise temperature. The circulatory system had to be coaxed, not shocked. Sudden change would break the nervous pathways before they could reconnect. I secured the IV lines into his arm and neck. Tubes slithered down from the gravity bag to his veins, and the first drop of the serum fell like an hourglass turning. I began compressions, 40 per minute, then pause, then again. The mechanical resuscitation unit clicked into place over his chest, hydraulic arms pressing down with inhuman consistency. The defibrillator was charged, not for cardiac rhythm, but to mimic the initial surge Cornish described in his notes. The jolt, he called it. I administered the 2nd dose, then the 3rd. Still nothing. The timer hit 27 minutes. I stared at the monitor, flatline. My hands were cold. Not from the air, from doubt. The kind that crawls up the spine and settles in your throat. And then, a flicker. His fingers twitched, just once. barely visible, but undeniable. I leaned closer. Muscles in his neck jerked, slow and erratic, as if his body was trying to remember itself. The eyelids fluttered, his chest heaved. A shallow breath hissed out, then another, not a gasp, a release. He was breathing. The mechanical compression stopped automatically. I disabled the machine. The silence that followed was deafening. Just the sound of air flowing in and out of lungs that seconds ago had belonged to a corpse. I backed away, my knees weak, the floor shifting beneath me like water. I had done it. He was alive, or something that looked like him. His eyes opened. I froze. They weren't clouded like I expected, not dazed or empty. They were focused, tracking, alert. But they didn't see me, not the way they used to. There was no recognition, just a dull, unfamiliar awareness. I whispered his name. He blinked once, then nothing. I spoke again, louder. "Ethan, can you hear me?" He didn't respond, didn't move, just stared. I stepped closer. He followed me with his eyes, slowly, deliberately. He didn't blink, not once in 5 minutes. I tried to check his vitals, but the moment I touched his wrist, his entire body flinched, violently. His head jerked toward me, his mouth opened slightly, but not to speak, to breathe, the way an animal does when it's scenting something new. I backed off. He lay there, perfectly still, watching. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was in the corner of the lab, the edge of the cold tile digging into my spine. I couldn't look away. It was him. And it wasn't. The serum had worked. But what it brought back wasn't Ethan. At least, not anymore. The first night I stayed in the lab, I couldn't bring myself to leave him alone. Or maybe I couldn't bear to let him out of my sight. He remained on the table connected to passive monitors, the Revivum slowly metabolizing through his system. He didn't sleep. Not once. I thought at first it was a side effect of the serum, elevated adrenaline, neurotransmitter imbalance. But after 24 hours, when I checked the readings again, I saw no signs of exhaustion, no yawn, no muscle tremor, no cognitive dulling. He just existed, alert, still, awake. When I touched his skin with a pin, he didn't react. No blink, no flinch. I pushed harder, nothing. The readout registered pressure, but no pain response. His threshold was gone, or perhaps overwritten. On the second night, I left the room to rest. When I returned, the chair I'd been using was turned around. I didn't remember moving it. I reviewed the camera feed. That was the first time I saw it. He didn't move while I was in the room, but the moment I left, he sat up, slowly, deliberately, then turned the chair toward the door and stared at it for 4 hours. His eyes never left that spot. When I returned, he lay exactly where I'd left him, in the same position, eyes closed. I checked the footage again, over and over, frame by frame. My pulse was a scream in my ears. The next day, I spoke to him directly, tried basic cognitive prompts, asked questions, described memories, told him stories only Ethan would know. He tilted his head once, then again, the way a dog does when it hears something unfamiliar, not confused, curious. I asked him what he remembered. He blinked, then nothing. I asked again, louder, nothing. Then on the 5th day he spoke. 3 words, not a whisper, not a groan. Clear, calm, cold. "Hello, Dr. Verin." That wasn't my name. I froze. The name meant nothing to me. I asked who that was. He didn't answer, just stared. It wasn't a mistake. He said it with intention, like he knew exactly who he was addressing. But it wasn't me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the name. I scoured my research, Cornish's notes, public records. Nothing. It was as if the name had been conjured from somewhere else, not from memory, but from another place entirely. Something was wrong, something I couldn't explain. The 6th night, I stayed late. hiding in the dark corner of the lab behind the storage cabinets where the security cameras wouldn't catch me. I needed to see what he did when he thought he was alone. Hours passed. Silence. Then movement. He sat up again, swung his legs over the side of the table, turned his head toward the door, the same way he had before. But this time he didn't just stare, he whispered. Words I couldn't hear clearly, but they were there. Soft, rhythmical, like a lullaby hummed in reverse. And then he smiled. Not a grin, not human. It was too wide, too symmetrical. I backed away quietly and left the lab. The next morning I found scratches on the lab walls, long uneven lines clustered near the door. They hadn't been there before. I checked the footage. Between 3:13 and 3:16 a.m., the screen glitched. 3 full minutes of static. When it resumed, he was back on the table, eyes closed, perfectly still. I began to dread being near him. The air around him felt thicker, heavy, electric, and I started hearing whispers outside the lab, in the corridors. When I followed them, the halls were always empty, but the whispers continued. A name I couldn't quite catch, repeated softly, almost kindly. I watched myself in the mirror that night and realized I didn't recognize the way I looked anymore. Had I brought back a body, or had something else taken residence? It started with the noises, subtle at first, a soft creak in the hall, the shift of weight across the floor, the faint hum of something trying to imitate breathing. I'd installed motion sensors outside the lab, crude but reliable. 3 nights in a row, the logs showed activity between 2 and 4 a.m. I'd always pacing in a straight line, stopping precisely in front of my office door, then retreating. He was walking the halls, but not like a man. When I reviewed the recordings, I noticed something else, the way he moved. His gait was staggered at first, unbalanced, like his muscles were still remembering how to behave. But after a few days, he began mimicking the rhythms of sounds he heard during the day. Footsteps, door squeaks, even my voice, repeating the pitch, the cadence, the inflections, not the words, just the pattern, as if he were learning how to be me. Then the lights started to flicker, first in the lab, then in the hallway, then throughout the entire wing. Maintenance couldn't explain it. Faulty wiring, they said. But it only happened at night, only when he was awake, and he was always awake. I stopped trusting the cameras. Several feeds were corrupted. Others looped meaningless frames. One showed a static image for 12 straight hours, except when I paused it frame by frame, his position changed, just slightly, just enough. One morning, I found a drawer in my office wide open, though I hadn't touched it in weeks. Inside, all my field notes, gone. In their place, a single sheet of paper, blank. Except for one thing, at the very bottom, in the center, in my own handwriting, Dr. Verin. I hadn't written it. I stopped sleeping altogether. My mind began to split under the weight of observation. I was being watched, not by surveillance, not by colleagues, but by something that understood me in ways no one else did. Something that wore Ethan's body like clothing. Then came the night I woke up and saw him, standing at the foot of my bed. No noise, no warning, just there. His eyes weren't hostile, they weren't empty either. They were patient, studying. He didn't speak, he didn't move. He just stood there, barefoot, his hands relaxed at his sides, head tilted slightly as though I was something fragile, something amusing. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body locked in place, my breath stuck somewhere between disbelief and terror. I don't remember reaching for the tranquilizer, but suddenly it was in my hand. I lunged, the needle found skin, and he didn't flinch, didn't fight. He just smiled, calm, like he had allowed it. The sedative worked fast. He collapsed in a heap. I dragged his body back to the lab, secured every restraint point, bolted the cuffs. When I looked back at the mirror on the wall, I saw myself again, pale, shaking, unsure of which face was truly mine. The next morning, he was still restrained, still smiling. I noticed something clenched in his left hand, a crumpled page torn from my journal. Written on it, in Ethan's handwriting, unmistakable, was a long passage. Dozens of lines of dense, continuous script, but it wasn't English. It wasn't any language I recognized. The letters were twisted, mirrored, overlapping like a spiral. I scanned it through linguistic databases. Nothing. I inverted the image, ran frequency analysis. Patterns appeared, not of language, but of rhythm. The text pulsed, like music or a message for someone else. Since that morning, I haven't spoken a word to him. Not out of fear, not even out of hatred, but because I know that whatever is behind his eyes, whatever now occupies the vessel of Ethan's sea, is waiting for me to speak. And I don't want to give it what it wants. He was gone. I unlocked the lab door that morning, expecting to see him strapped to the table, smiling that passive, impossible smile, but the restraints were empty, the cuffs unfastened, undamaged. No signs of struggle, no signs of escape. The room was cold, unnaturally so. The kind of cold that settles in the bones, not the skin. I checked the sensors. Nothing had triggered them, no doors opened, no alarms tripped. The surveillance footage was corrupted, static from midnight to dawn. But on the far wall, just above the gurney, a message had been scratched deep into the plaster. "You brought me back, now stay awake." Each letter was uneven, etched with something metallic. A piece of surgical steel, perhaps, or a fingernail. I ran through the facility, room by room, screaming his name, or the name I used to call him. No response. But something had changed. I began seeing him, not directly, not where a person should be, but in glass, in screens, in reflective metal. I'd turn to face a monitor and catch a glimpse of his silhouette standing just behind me. I'd close the mirror cabinet in the break room and see his face peering over my shoulder. And then there were the whispers, always from just out of view. "Dr. Verin." The name again. Always that name. I tried to convince myself it was lack of sleep, trauma, stress, but then I found the freezer. The vials, the backups of Revivum were gone, every single one. No broken locks, no tampering, just gone. And that's when I knew. I hadn't brought him back. I had let something through. This wasn't a resurrection. It was a passage, a transit. And the thing that came wearing Ethan's face had no intention of staying behind glass. I destroyed everything I could. Burned the notes, smashed the drives, bleached the equipment. I collapsed the lab entrance with a controlled gas leak and triggered the fire suppression manually. But it wasn't enough, because I still see him. I still hear him. And every night, just before I close my eyes, I feel the cold settle in again. Not in the room, inside me. And I remember the message carved into that wall, "Now stay awake." Because if I sleep, I'm afraid I'll wake up somewhere else. I haven't left this place in weeks. I don't know what time it is anymore. I keep the lights dim, the windows sealed. I sleep in shifts, 2 hours at most, if sleep is even the word for it now. Dreams aren't rest, they're transmissions. Shadows blinking behind my eyes, mouthing words I can't understand. I've boarded up every reflective surface. Monitors turned to the wall, mirrors smashed. Not out of superstition, out of experience. Because I've seen him there, still watching me, watching through me. Sometimes I hear the scratching again, not on walls but under my skin, like a reminder that the boundary I thought existed between life and death was never real. I thought I brought him back, thought I'd cheat the laws of mortality and claim victory over the abyss, but I didn't raise a man. I summoned a signal, and now I think I might be the transmitter, a beacon. Whatever came back didn't stop with him. It left something behind, Something that sits inside my mind like a seed, waiting to grow in the dark. He never said my name, because I'm not who I was anymore. And if you're listening to this now, you might already be infected.